Okay. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming on such an awful wet night. So I feel very humbled that you've all turned up. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mary Sharma. I've been working in Stroud in alternative medicine for almost 30 years now. I'm a naturopath. And a naturopath means I'm trained in lots of different disciplines. And so I'll go through that so that you still understand what that is. And I think my interest in health actually dates back to when I was 8 years old and my mother nearly died. She was given 6 hours to live. She had a tumour on her spine. And she was rushed down to French A. They saved her life, but she was put on lots of medications. This was back in the 1960s. And then over the following years, she decided she wanted to come off all of those drugs. And what she did was she became very interested in nutrition. So by the time I was 10, she had taken white bread out of our house, and I thought the world had ended because the white bread had gone. I was like, oh my God. And then it just progressively kind of got worse, but then obviously, you know. But she was reading Here's Health. I mean, there wasn't that much information in the early 70s, and so she was going to the health stores and she was getting the Here's Health magazine and reading that to me. And me being a teenager, grunted behind my book, but actually all that information was going in, and I became very interested in nutrition, not realizing how interested I was at that point. And I knew I wanted to get into alternative medicine, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And at that point, I was only familiar with osteopathy and chiropractic and acupuncture, and I didn't want to do that. So it was really on the birth of my first child that then I decided it's nutrition that I want to learn. It's all about diet and understanding how food affects us. I then trained in a course in allergy therapy, which is just using a bit of kinesiology with testing for foods. And then that led into me doing a 6-year course in nutrition, which then led into iridology, homotoxicology, and then it went on. And I have never stopped learning. So in the last 30 years, I have continued searching for that understanding of why do we get ill. And I think I finally sort of understand it now. So that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. I've got a passion to share the knowledge that I've accumulated over those 30 years, and I've written practitioner courses. I think there's about 5 of them up and running now. So students are passing on that information to then be able to then have these people also carrying on this understanding, this depth of knowledge about why we get ill. So what I'm sharing with you tonight is actually a small part of a webinar that I did for one of the colleges about a month ago. So if any of you want, are interested in more information, then I can send you that link if you get in touch with me. And I am used to talking to students, and so sometimes I go into a little bit too much depth. So, just take what you can from tonight. I think you'll be able to all take something from it, and just accept it on whatever level makes sense to you. And if possible, if we could do questions at the end, because it might be that I actually answer the question later on in the lecture. Okay, so what is naturopathy? Naturopathy is the creation of conditions which enable the body to heal itself as far as it is capable of so doing. And what that actually means is that as a naturopath, I have an understanding of the person that I'm working with. I understand their strengths and their weaknesses, their vitality, and what I can do and what I can't do, and then putting them into a situation where they can then move forward and heal. So that's what naturopathy is about, doing the least possible, not creating any harm. And we have an understanding of disease that actually there is only one disease, and that is the ability to detoxify and get rid of toxins on a daily basis. And if that doesn't happen, then we become ill. And I think if you sort of Googled naturopathy and looked for the principles of naturopathy, then you would come up with something like this. And when people ask me what I do, and I say, well, I'm a naturopath, very often they look at me very blankly and they just say, what's a naturopath? And I always answer saying, I'm really sad to hear that, because 100 years ago you would have known what a naturopath was. And that's what, you know, by the end of this talk, you'll understand why I say that. So we've got first do no harm, which the doctors have as well. We've got physician as teacher. I do an awful lot of teaching. Dossier means, that's where the term doctor comes from. It means teacher. And I'm passionate about teaching my clients and also my students. And we believe that prevention is better than obviously getting ill in the first place. So prevention is the best cure. But unfortunately, the way that medicine has gone is we wait until we get ill, and then we go to the doctor, and then they give us medicine to stop the symptoms. So naturopathy is made up of lots of different disciplines. It's got its roots in Eastern medicine. That's where its foundations are. In Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, and Unani medicine, which is Persian medicine, which is based on Greek medicine. So those four Eastern disciplines are at its foundation, heavily influenced by herbal medicine. And then nutrition is at its core. And then we've got hydrotherapy, which is using water techniques. Homeopathy, a lot of naturopaths use iridology as a diagnostic technique. And the early naturopaths were all trained as either a chiropractor or an osteopath. So body work is a big part of keeping the body in balance. And then psychology and understanding how the mind affects the body is another part, and exercise. So I just wanted to share just a few influences, and I think as we go through the talk you'll understand why I've sort of included these. So here we've got Samuel Hahnemann, who's the father of homeopathy, and he taught that like cures like. So that's what homeopathy, we use like with like. Nicholas Culpeper here, very, very famous herbalist, also said the same. He said that we should heal like with like, sympathy he called it, old-fashioned word, sympathy, to use sympathy, and then that would sort the disease out. But if the disease had progressed to a certain extent, then we would have to use antipathy, which is the opposite. So then we would use the opposite to heal or stop those symptoms, and that's allopathic medicine, using the opposite. And then this person here on the right is Sebastian Kneipp, Father Kneipp, and he wanted to go into the ministry, but as a young man he had incurable TB, so he wasn't accepted. And he came across a pamphlet which was about cold water bathing. This was back in the 1800s. And he thought, well, he'd got nothing to use, so he jumped in the Rhine every day. And he didn't get better, but he realised that actually he wasn't getting any worse. And so then he carried on with that cold water bathing and completely cured himself of TB, was then accepted into the church, and then started to work on his congregation and telling them about health and disease, and used lots of hydrotherapy practices within his clinic. Very well known, and trained a lot of the later naturopaths. And I've chosen Professor Anton Beauchamp to talk about as well. Not a naturopath, but his work was very influential for the naturopaths because it confirmed what they believed. And he formulated his theory of what are called microzymas. So he found that the cell wasn't the smallest thing. The smallest thing were these microzymas. And they were able to change into whatever was needed depending on the environment. So they would change into a cell, different types of cells, or they could change into bacteria, viruses, or yeasts, depending on the environment. And they were there before birth and after death. They were indestructible. And he was a contemporary of Claude Bernard and Louis Pasteur, and it's rumoured that Louis Pasteur actually took a lot of his work, plagiarised his work, and took it and gave it as his own work. And this book here, The Blood and Its Third Element, which is Beauchamp's final work, leaves you in no confusion whatsoever with his frustration towards Pasteur for continually taking his work, passing it off as his own and not understanding it. And that's how we then ended up with the germ theory. Pasteur was very, very influential. He had a lot of money behind him and very sort of bombastic. So that's the way that medicine went for one reason or another. And Beauchamp said, diseases are born of us and in us. So they happen in us. They start in us. We don't catch it. It happens in us depending on the terrain. And that's what Claude Bernard was also saying. Not a very nice person. He was the first vivisectionist. His wife left him. I mean, he'd married for money anyway, but his wife left him and set up a charity for animal rights. But he put forward the terrain theory. And what he said was, in order to remain healthy, we need to have alkaline tissues and a negative charge. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. So it's really important just to get that what he said. To be healthy, we need alkaline tissues, alkaline cells, and a negative charge. And the things that contributed to that was nutrition, so what we were eating and the nutrients that we absorbed, and being able to clear toxins. So that was his work. Thomas Allinson, because I don't think we really realised what a wonderful person he was. This is where Allinson's bread comes from, although obviously what we see now in the shops is not what he would have advocated. But he was saying that we really needed to have stone ground bread. And he advocated vegetarian diet, healthy living, fresh air, exercise, and developed what was called the hygienic medicine. He also said that we should avoid alcohol, tobacco, tea and coffee. And he said smoking caused cancer, which was actually revolutionary in those days because they used to think that it was good for you. And he was very opposed to vaccination, particularly the compulsory vaccination at that point of smallpox. And he was quite vocal about the detrimental effect of drugs. So obviously he was struck off. And he was also supported women's equality as well. He believed that all women should have a right to say how many children they should have. And he would publish pamphlets about all of his work, and he published pamphlets about that as well. And then he got prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act for saying things like that. Anyway, then World War I came, and they then realised that actually some of what he was saying was true, and so they offered him to be resurrected as a doctor, but he refused, and he went on and carried on teaching his hygienic medicine and teaching the public about health and disease. And then we've got Dr. John Tilden, another doctor that was disillusioned about using drugs. By 1926, he was producing a monthly magazine called The Health Review and Critique, and he formulated the theory of toxemia from the bowel. So basically, if the bowels aren't clearing out on a daily basis, then those toxins are reabsorbed. And he said all food was a stimulant. Therefore, overeating was overstimulating. And then we've got stimulants on top of that, such as tea and coffee and overworking, and stress itself is a stimulant. And all of those things lead to slower eliminations and retaining the toxins in the blood. And then those toxins add to that stimulation, and so we go round in this vicious circle. And he said in his book, according to toxin philosophy, every so-called disease is a crisis of toxemia, which means that toxins have accumulated in the blood above the toleration point, and the crisis, the so-called disease, whether it's called a cold, a flu, pneumonia, headache, or typhoid fever, is just a vicious elimination. So nature is endeavouring to rid the body of toxin. Any treatment that obstructs this effort at elimination baffles nature in her effort at self-curing. And that heavily influenced the naturopaths, particularly John Harvey Kellogg, very, very famous naturopath. Very strange man, if you want to look into his, what he was like, but he was very influential naturopath. That's where we get Kellogg's cornflakes from. He set up a business with his brother, argued with his brother because his brother wanted to add sugar to the cornflakes and he didn't. His brother won, and the rest is history. The cornflakes that you're familiar with. But John Harvey Kellogg ran the Battle Creek Sanatorium in Michigan, and he focused on bowel cleansing and gut health. Lots of enemas, yogurt enemas, vegetarian diet. I mean, the vegetarian diet is certainly, comes from Ayurvedic medicine, where meat is used as a medicine. But the naturopaths really took on board this vegetarian diet because it was more alkaline forming. And he, it's said that he actually was the person that developed peanut butter, and also, nut meat and things like that. So we can trace things back to John Harvey Kellogg. Used a lot of hydrotherapy, wrote many books, and that there is the Battle Creek Sanitarium, just to show you how big that was. So when somebody says to me, what's a naturopath? That's the kind of thing I'm thinking of when they don't know what it was. That wasn't that long ago that he would have been working there, and very, very well known. And then we've got Henry Lindler, another really important naturopath. He was eating a lot of very rich food, and went to see Father Knipe, the Sebastian Knipe with the water therapy. He went to see him, and Knipe, who never minced his words, said to him, "You have sugar disease and you are a pig." And so he put him on a diet of vegetables, cured the diabetes, and then Lindler came back to the States, trained as a doctor, and then set up his own nature cure. And he was in Chicago, and then, these are, where he was working from. And his book is the backbone to the naturopathic course that I've written. And then I wanted to just bring your attention to Professor J.E.R. McDonough. No pictures at all of him on the internet. I suspect all his work is gathering dust in the libraries of the medical libraries. And he was famous for his unitary theory of disease. And what he did was he compared plant sap, animal blood, human blood, and he said that all disease was related to changes in those proteins within the blood or the plant sap. It was just to do with changes to the protein. So I'm going to return to that later on, and you'll see how it all connects in. And then Bernard Jensen, trained by Lindler and Kellogg, they were trained by Knipe. He also travelled the world to study the diet and the lifestyle of different cultures. He also focused on bowel cleansing. His book here, Tissue Cleansing Through Bowel Management, that was one of the books I had to study when I trained years ago. And he actually trained the person who trained me. And he also was an iridologist, and so the American School of Iridology is his work. He was a chiropractor as well. And he treated over 350,000 people, at least, minimum. So what went wrong? Why is it that people don't know what a naturopath is? So we've got the germ theory. We've got adverts like this with penicillin and World War, 2 world wars, and the use of antibiotics. I mean, in Russia they were using garlic. They called garlic the Russian penicillin, and garlic actually is one of the most powerful antimicrobials that we know, and that will work alongside an antibiotic and enhance the action of an antibiotic, because a lot of antibiotics aren't working now. So we've got used to this miracle medicine, this pill for an ill culture. And we also have Morris Fishbein, who's the editor of the American Medical Association, who criticised naturopathy as quackery, remembering that the American Medical Association was set up by the Rockefellers, those of you that understand who the Rockefellers are. And then we've got the Flexner Report, which I will talk about now. So that is Abraham Flexner, not a particularly friendly looking person, and his brother was the president of the Rockefeller Institute, which says a lot. And they had extremely high standards for all medical colleges. So they basically went around all the colleges, they put in very, very high standards, and a lot of the smaller colleges had to close. And the medical schools were not allowed to teach naturopathy or homeopathy. And if it did, those graduates were not allowed to be doctors. They were not recognised as doctors. So that resulted, by 1925, in over 10,000 herbalists out of business. 1,500 chiropractors have been prosecuted for quackery. And in 1900, 22 homeopathic and naturopathic schools had then been reduced to 2 or 3 by 1923. And any physician that didn't graduate from a Flexner-approved medical school didn't get a job. So by 1950, there were no naturopathic schools open at all. And Rockefeller said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. So that's just a little backdrop to the history of naturopathy. I mean, it's much, much bigger than that. But it's just a little bit of a backdrop there. It's just so that you've got an understanding of where some of these principles come from. So these are the principles that I've used in my practice for at least 25 years. And I'm first of all just going to draw your attention to, this is from Unani medicine, so Greek medicine. Greek medicine was then developed by the Islamic Empire, so Unani medicine. And they have 6 essential causes of health and disease. How well we're sleeping, what is our diet, what are our fluids, emotions, our stress levels and how we're dealing with that, what type of air that we're actually breathing in, is it contaminated, is it, lots of fumes in it, are we getting out into the environment, and are we living with the seasons? So where it says air, it's actually much bigger than that. Whether the bowels are working well or not, and also whether we're exercising, or whether we're exercising too much or not enough. So it's always about balance. So those are the 6 essential causes of health and disease from Unani medicine. And if those are out of balance, that's going to set up a very subtle stress in the body. And it's stress that is at the bottom of everything. You know, when we go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, it's stress related. So stress can be mental emotional. We tend to think of it as mental emotional, but it could also be a physical stress, a structural stress. We might have something going on with our hip. We might have whiplash. That's a stress to the body. We might be out of tune with nature, not living with seasonal changes, eating salads all the way through winter, and not realizing our full potential is also a stress to the body as well. And it could be a dietary stress. There might be something that we're eating that is actually quite stressful to us. It might be chemicals, it might be heavy metals that we're not able to get rid of. It might be genetic, something that we've inherited. But all of those things are a stress on the body. And it's understanding what stress does is what we're going to go through next, because it's the effect of stress on the body. Because people bandy around stress, but it's understanding how that relates into a physical symptom in the body. And stress is a diuretic. And a diuretic means it takes water away from the body. So we've got all of those ones I've just talked about, stress, mental, emotional, physical, dietary, all of those are a stress. But also tea, coffee, alcohol and sugar. They're all diuretics. They take water away from the body. And what that does, taking water away, also takes away potassium and magnesium. Those are 2 of our electrolytes. And in taking away potassium and magnesium, we then get a mismanagement of the electrolytes in the body. So what I'm going to liken the body to here is a test tube. So we should be about 70% water. And whether we're talking about the body or whether we're talking about a test tube in a laboratory, let's say that we're going to do an experiment. If we were doing the experiment, then we'd want to know how much hydration are we going to put into this test tube? What's the pH? Is it going to be acid conditions or alkaline conditions that we're doing this? And how much light are we going to put in? Is it going to be in the dark, or are we adding lots of light to this experiment? And also the temperature. How much temperature are we going to add to that? So whether we're talking about a test tube and an experiment in the laboratory, or whether we're talking about a human, or whether we're talking about plants, if we had plants, we'd want to know what's the pH of the soil. Is the pH of the soil correct for that plant to grow? Has it got enough water? If there's a drought, then we'd be adding more water in. Is there enough light for that plant? And also, what about the temperature? We wouldn't be planting it in the middle of winter when it's frozen ground, for example. So all of those things, hydration, pH, light availability and temperature, affect the plant, affect any experiment, but also us as a human being, those 4 factors. So we need to be hydrated. We're about 70% water. And the liver, in Chinese medicine, is the planner. It plans everything in the body. And it's the main organ of hydration. So if it hasn't got water in the body to the extent that it would like to have it, then it can't function as well as it would like to. And then that becomes a bit of a stress as well. And the colon is the reservoir of hydration. It holds the water in the body. So the colon therefore holds the message of how hydrated we are. And it's not as simple as just drinking water. It's more to do with having lots and lots of vegetables, because the vegetables bring water into the body. They also bring in potassium and magnesium. And then they sit in the colon, and as they're in the colon and moving through, they're bringing that hydrated message to the body. And we say everything starts in the gut. Hippocrates said everything starts in the gut. It comes from Ayurvedic medicine, because in Ayurveda we have the different elements, and the element in the gut in Ayurveda is what we call vata, or air. And that air element moves everything in the body. And so if we haven't got that movement of vegetables there, and rice, and what we call a swollen diet, and the body is picking up that there's more dryness there, then that's the movement of vata. So then we get vata symptoms. We could get constipation, or we could get depression, anxiety, for example. So it's all connected with the gut, and we know now that there's the connection with the gut and the mind. Go back to a cell. So when I'm talking about the cells, I want you to think, these are the tissues in the body, this is the body. Yeah, we are made up of trillions of cells. So there's a hydrated cell, and here we've got a cell that isn't so hydrated because we've got maybe a lot of stress going on with this person. And so we've got half of it hydrated, the other half not. So we've got more stagnation, we've got more toxicity building up, which is what Dr. Tilden was talking about, with that not being able to move things out and toxicity building up. And then if that carries on for a long time, then we can get a chronic picture, and we can become quite cut off and low function. And if we then relate that back to 2 people, 2 test tubes, then we've got one that isn't as hydrated as the other one. And so we've got a change in hydration there. Those 2 people are going to react to things in completely different ways. So when we read reports about, oh, we all need omega-3, or we all need to take vitamin B, those 2 people are going to react totally differently to that because of that change in hydration. And we've also got less movement there, because we haven't got the water to move things through. Water is for movement in the body. And it doesn't matter, I'm talking about, supplements there, but it could be a massage that person's having, or a homeopathic remedy that person's taking. It's going to have a different effect on those 2 people because of the difference in hydration. So we've got reduced detoxification. And we've also got a reduced ability to react to all the seasons, the equinoxes, the solstice and the moon. It's a new moon today. But the equinoxes are really powerful times of year, and I try and see those clients that I work with on a regular basis. I try and see them spring and autumn, because we do a detox at this time of year. We've been through the autumn equinox, the end of September, and what I generally find is a few weeks after that, depending on the person, there can be a flare-up of issues, or there can be a cold, because the body is trying to get rid of this extra toxicity. Travels down to the liver says, whoa, I can't deal with you, and then it gets thrown back into the lymph, and then we can get a cold, or a chest infection, or an ear infection, or something like that. But also we can get an exacerbation of whatever symptoms we might have that might get worse at that point. So some people notice eczema flares up, for example, Or if there's chronic fatigue, then it could get a deeper picture. In Tibetan medicine, they're called conflict seasons. So we've been through summer, which is hot, so we've had the heat of summer, but we've got cold coming in, so there's a conflict. And the same with the spring, where we've been through winter, so internally we're cold, externally we've got the warmth coming in. So they're conflict seasons where Tibetan medicine recognises that we can get flare-ups of problems. And then if we look at it from a Chinese perspective, we go through the summer and we reap what we sow. So if we're really looking after ourselves through the summer and eating really well, then when we come up to harvest time, which is the earth element, late summer, then we've got that lovely harvest to then get us through the winter. Yeah, so that will give us the strength to get through winter. After the earth element, we've got the metal element, which is where we are now moving into the water element. Metal element is autumn time. The metal element relates to the gut. It relates to dryness as well. So a lot of people can get gut issues this time of year, or they can get flare-ups, or they may even start their gut issues in the autumn. I see that a lot. Wood element is springtime. That's when the liver's most active, whether we look at it from a Chinese perspective or from an Ayurvedic perspective. It's when the liver and the gallbladder are most active, and that's when they are there to do their detoxification. And then we've got the full moon. So the moon is obviously pulling the waves, it's pulling sodium, so the salt in the sea, so it's pulling the waves, and it changes the ionosphere around the earth, and then that has an effect on the pull of sodium out of the cells, which you'll see the significance of that in a minute. And so as that sodium comes out of the cells, makes the blood sugar drop, and then we can get bad-tempered, irritable, impatient, we want more to eat, more coffee, or it's where the word lunatic comes from if that's an extreme case. So we should be reacting to all of these seasonal changes if we're in touch with nature. And I just want to home in on the metal element, because it's such a clear picture, that if we've got problems in the colon, let's say the colon's not working as well as it could do, then what the body can do is throw that rubbish out onto the skin. So then we might get a skin issue, such as eczema, for example. If that's suppressed, let's say it's pushed back in with cortisone cream, then we would move up to lungs. That's why we often see eczema and asthma together. And the lungs are the seat of depression in Chinese medicine. And so how do we know whether we've, that's been touched? But depression is a depressing effect on the body. It's a slowing down, yeah? And the body will always try and protect the mind as long as it can. But we can then move up to mind issues like ADHD, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. And it's the person that trained me made the connections here with the MMR vaccination, where if they got a problem with asthma, then that could push them up to autism, to mind level. So that's a little bit about the metal element there. And then I want to just go through these electrolytes now. So it's straightforward. I explain this to my clients a lot within their sessions. So inside the cell we've got potassium and magnesium and water. Predominantly we've got water inside the cell. Outside the cell we have sodium and calcium, and there's hydrogen there. So these electrolytes, they move backwards and forwards across the cell, but predominantly we need potassium and magnesium inside the cell, sodium and calcium outside the cell for the correct charge in the body. And that relates back to Claude Bernard's work. So on a daily basis, sodium and calcium move inside the cell. They're like a truck. They take the nutrients in. So zinc would go in on the back of that. Glucose goes in on the back of sodium. So they travel into the cell and then cause a reconfiguration of hydrogen ions, makes the cell more acidic, and then potassium and magnesium will just push them back. So there's this flow backwards and forwards continually across the cell membrane. And it's so important for us to keep sodium out of the cell that we actually put aside between 1/3 to 1/2 of our total energy is just to keep sodium out of the cell. So, that sort of then when you think about people that have got the fatigue, there's an element of this going on at a cellular level. So we need to have this correct charge. We need potassium and magnesium in the right place. We need sodium and calcium outside the cell. And then that will create the correct charge here. So we've got positive nucleus, we've got negative on the inside of the cell membrane, and positive on the outside of the cell membrane. And if we've got that, then we attract lots of negative electron clouds. And those negative electron clouds will then trap photons of light. And we're now in the photon belt, in the galaxy is now in the photon belt. There's a lot more light available to us, a lot more wisdom coming in, as long as we can access it. Now, a virus is positively charged. So if a virus, if there's virus activity, and then that comes towards this cell, which has got a positive charge there, it's got the correct charge, it's healthy, then that will be repelled, and then we won't get that viral activity. So there we've got the electron clouds. We've got the photons of light being trapped within those electron clouds, and then we've got the oxygen coming in as well. And we need those for the cells to work properly. That's our connection to outer wisdom, bringing that light in. So again, I just want to dip into Unani medicine here, but also into all the Eastern traditions. They all talk about this vital energy, this vital spirit, vital source, and also naturopathy does, and homeopathy. And that's the strength of that vitality is determined by our parents and grandparents, what we've actually inherited. And in Unani medicine, they say that that vital source comes into the body, mixes with pneuma, which is the breath, and then is converted by the vital force in the body to make something called the innate heat. And the innate heat is the most important thing to Unani medicine. And the innate heat relates to the mitochondria in the body. So if those mitochondria are working well, then they're producing lots of energy for us. And we might just say, well, what is this vital source? What is this vital energy that these Eastern traditions talk about? My personal sort of understanding of it is I think it relates to our ability to utilize oxygen and light. And I'll go through in a minute, and hopefully you'll be able to see where my thought processes are. So if we go back to the mitochondria, they work at a very high temperature. They create heat and moisture in the body. And in order to be healthy, we need heat and moisture. That's what Unani medicine says. We need heat and moisture. If we're cold, then we're not as healthy. And so these mitochondria produce energy for us. We've got adenosine triphosphate here, ATP. This is our energy currency. The mitochondria, for those of you that aren't sure, they're within every cell in the body, and there's hundreds and hundreds within each cell, and they're all producing energy for us, but also water. So this is our cellular hydration. And the actual nutrients that are needed to make that energy, the ATP and that water, they're all what we call chromophores. They attract light, they give off light, they hold light. So we need to be able to bring that light into the mitochondria to be able to produce energy. And that's now proven with Western medical research, but also that's what Unani medicine says. So we could say that the sun hydrates us because it's bringing in that light. So going back to our cell, we've got the potassium and magnesium inside, and we've got the sodium and the calcium outside. Now, historically, our diets were very high in potassium and magnesium. Lots of vegetables and the fruits, and meat has also got potassium and magnesium in. So historically, we had a lot of potassium and magnesium, and that's how our body is set up. It's set up to get rid of potassium and magnesium. We never needed to worry about it. If there was a problem, we could just go back and eat those foods, and then we would replenish potassium and magnesium. But it didn't have as much sodium and calcium. There was enough, but it wasn't as plentiful. So when we have stress, we hold on to more sodium and calcium, and the hydrogen makes the cell more acidic. So what we've got is holding on to more sodium and calcium, getting rid of potassium and magnesium, which is actually the effect of stress. We lose water, we lose potassium, we lose magnesium, on the assumption that when that stress goes away, we're going to go back and eat our nuts, berries, roots and shoots, which then push in the potassium and magnesium, and then we go back to normal here, pushing back the sodium and the calcium. But unfortunately that doesn't tend to happen because we've always got a lot of stress. I mean, we're all under huge amounts of stress. But we need to have calcium outside the cell in order for the blood sugar to be stable. We need magnesium inside, calcium outside, because what those two do is they regulate insulin between them. And so if we're continually losing magnesium, then we're going to have more of a blood sugar problem. And so low magnesium is related to, diabetics have very often got very low levels of magnesium. So that would follow that anybody with a blood sugar issue has got a problem with magnesium and utilising magnesium. And it's not as straightforward as just taking a pot of magnesium, because you need to unravel what's happened beforehand. These are some of the symptoms of low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. I'm not going to read them all out, but you can see that there's loads of them. And more. So just by sorting the blood sugar out, can sort out an awful lot of symptoms. And there's more. So I'm just trying to illustrate that actually it can be as simple as blood sugar that, that we go to the doctors with. Okay. So what does this cell do when it's losing water? Because the body never works against us, it always tries to do the best it can. And so what it does is it toughens up the cell membrane. It makes it tougher so that actually we're not losing that water. But that can also mean that we've then got trapped inside, too much sodium and calcium. So we've got the sodium and the calcium out of balance here. We've got too much there, possibly not as much here. That's going to make us crave salt. Calcium's going to be an issue as well. We've got to have calcium out here. If we haven't got calcium out here, we're going to die. And so we have to have it, and then we can take it from the bone, though. So long term, that would be your osteoporosis, arthritis, that kind of picture. But because we've got this reconfiguration of hydrogen ions, that cell becomes more acidic. So when I'm talking about the cell, I'm talking about tissues, I'm talking about the body. So the body becomes more acidic. We therefore get more oxidation to try and correct that, which leads to more inflammation. And they say inflammation is at the bottom of every disease. But before that, we've got this electrolyte imbalance. Naturopathy at a high sodium state. So we've got a thickened cell membrane, and the light can't get through that cell as easily. We're holding on to sodium and calcium. And I've put an example here. This is an iris which has got the sodium-calcium cholesterol ring around. You can see that quite clearly. Sometimes seen in younger people, more often in older people. And it's if the opticians see it, then they'll send that person off to the doctor for a cholesterol check. In iridology, it tells us that there's a mismanagement of calcium, sodium and cholesterol. And those people, that the personality that goes with that are people that are quite cut off. They're very much in their heads. They can be quite stubborn and they don't like change. Which is exactly what's happening at a cellular level. It's being cut off and protected. It's a protective mechanism. But also we can't get the light through, and therefore we can have things like the SAD syndrome. We feel better on a bright sunny day, and blood sugar issues I've mentioned. So we've got the sodium and the calcium inside the cell here. Cell becoming more acidic. We've got pH change because we've got more acidity, less alkalinity. Losses of potassium and magnesium, holding on to more sodium. So going back to our two people, we've got a hydration change and a pH change now. Those two people are going to be completely different. They're going to have completely different symptoms. But also they're not going to be utilising the light as effectively. And if we think about a glass of water and we shine the full spectrum of light through, then it's going to come through the other side exactly the same. And the same with a cell that has got the membrane working properly. If we shine the full spectrum of light through, it's going to come through the other way. And we exist on light. We need light. That's why we don't feel good when it's dark. But whatever is going on at a cellular level will determine how we actually utilise that light and the messages that that light brings us. So if we go back to our cell, we've got the water losses, we've got the toughened up cell membrane, we can't get the light through as easily, we've got a change of charge there, so we haven't got the positive charge so much on the outside of the membrane, so we're going to have less electron clouds building up there, which means less ability to trap photons of light and less oxygen. And that's going to then affect those mitochondria. It's going to affect the whole way that cell is working, affect the whole way that body is working. And obviously feeling better on a bright sunny day. If we've got thicker cell membranes, then it's going to be more difficult to get that light through. This is the SAD syndrome, why people don't feel so good in the winter. We get the messages distorted. So that light coming through is then distorted slightly to the next cell, to the next cell. So those messages that we're getting are slightly incorrect. And we know that we need to be out in the light to get vitamin D. But it's not as straightforward as that. And I'll give you an example of an ex-student that I've been working with. And she lived in Morocco. And she'd been working with a practitioner for a year. Her vitamin D levels were extremely low. And she'd been taking vitamin D for a year and nothing was changing. And so the way that I was working with her was just reassuring the body everything was okay. So going back to those naturopathic principles and just working on hydration, lots of vegetables, blood sugar balance. And by the end of that year, she did another vitamin D test and it would come up to really good levels. And at the same time I was working with her with that, I was talking to somebody that runs one of the blood testing labs up in London, and he said to me, I don't understand why I can't get people in the Middle East to get their vitamin D levels out, even though they're out in the sun all the time. And I said, well, they're dehydrated. And he was trained very functionally, allopathically, and he couldn't understand what I was talking about. But I'm hoping that you can begin to make some connections here. And then that particular client, she then had to move to Dubai this year, and her vitamin D levels plummeted again because of the stress of having to move. So all of that affected her, so we're just working at that level again. And then the essential fatty acids bring light in as well, so I'm going to touch on that in a moment. So this is something that I use for the students, the analogy of a muddy pool. I've used glasses here. And it would be nice to think that, you know, when we're born, we come in with a clean slate, that we haven't got anything bad that we've inherited, but we probably come in like this with whatever we've inherited from our parents, whatever vaccines, antibiotics, whatever illnesses they've had. So it's probably a bit more like that. And then the childhood illnesses come along, and they were there, or they are there, to get rid of that inherited toxicity. This is what Steiner was saying, that we need to have that vibrancy, that heat, to get rid of rubbish. And if we suppress that, so if we put vaccines in, if we put antibiotics in, then that might outwardly make that look better, but actually we've got a silting up of toxicity going on at a much deeper level. So the body might have another go. And if that's suppressed, going back to what Tilden was talking about, nature, if we keep suppressing this, then we just get that toxicity building up and we get a slower, darker, colder cell not being able to have that vitality to actually throw up a fever. And then we can end up with complete stagnation if that's carried on for too long. So if we take this cell, we've got the full spectrum of light coming in, and I've obviously exaggerated this just to get the concept across, the message coming out the other side is going to be slightly different. A distorted message. And then if we then take that message and pass it through, and again, hugely exaggerated, we get different messages coming out. And these people where this is happening, very closed, very cut off, it's very dark in there, it's very cold in that cell, they're cut off, it's frightening. You imagine what that cell must feel like. It's disconnected from the light, and that's our source of wisdom. We're disconnected. So they're unable to make any connections, and that's a very fearful place. And that's how, we control people with fear, don't we? And fear, in Chinese medicine, the emotion of fear relates to the water element. So hopefully you can make the connections there with hydration and the emotion associated with that. So going back to our two people, then we've got the hydration change, we've got the pH change, and we've got that light availability. We haven't got as much light getting in there. They're going to react to things in completely different ways. And then touching on essential fatty acids, wherever we live on the globe, we have got the essential fatty acids around us that we need. So if you think about the Inuit up at the North Pole, they eat traditionally a lot of blubber, fish, oily fish, so they had a lot of omega-3. They didn't get depression, so historically they didn't get depression because that omega-3 brings light into the body. Flax oil is very high in omega-3. You grow it in Brazil, there's no omega-3 in it. You grow it in Canada, there's a lot of omega-3 in it because that's where you need it. Where we live here, we need more omega-6. But because we've degenerated, because we've got this darkness going on and the cell not being able to work properly, we need more omega-3. That's why there's so much research into omega-3 saying, oh, we need omega-3 for depression or whatever, it helps depression. But that's why, because it's bringing the light in. And all of the endocrine system, so see, those essential fatty acids, they work with the endocrine system. They're broken down into something called a prostaglandin, which then work with the whole body, but particularly with the endocrine system. The endocrine system, all those endocrine glands sit on the chakras, which are light and energy centers. So, fats and light go together. And also the fats make up the cell membrane, so they're determining what light comes into the body as well. So if we've got good fats in our diet, then we've got a good cell membrane which is bringing the light in. But if we've got this stress picture going on and we've got dehydration, then we get more stagnation. So then we get into a situation which I see a lot with people where actually we're not breaking down the fats properly. And that might go back 2 generations. You might have inherited a situation where you're not breaking down the fats as well as you would like to, as well as the body would like to. It's issues breaking down choline, which some of you, if you are practitioners, you'll recognise that. But I won't go into that because it's going to get too complicated. But in a nutshell, may not be breaking down these essential fatty acids. And if we have got issues, then we've got the prostaglandin problem, which is going to affect the endocrine system. I see so many people with endocrine problems, and perimenopausal problems, and menopausal problems, and we get hooked onto all of these things, but actually underneath that is this problem with essential fatty acids and being able to utilise light. You can also get immune system imbalances, central nervous system. You can't separate those systems out. They all interact with one another. And then we can get issues with energy production, homocysteine, histamine. The histamine is the neurotransmitter that regulates water balance in the body. So if we're dehydrated, we're going to be producing more histamine. So going back to Unani medicine, we've got this vital source coming in. We've got that making the innate heat. We've got the mitochondria producing all this heat and moisture for us. But if we haven't got that light coming in, because we've got that darker cell membrane, we've got that change of charge, so therefore we're not attracting those photons of light in, it becomes much darker within that cell, much darker within that body, not functioning as well. And so then we have lower energy and lower temperature as well. And lower temperature is associated with lots and lots of different symptoms. I've spoken about some of these. We've got aches and pains there, SAD syndrome I've mentioned, depression, anxiety, blood sugar issues, of which there are many, thyroid issues, of which there are loads. But we've got this slower, sluggish movement in the body. And then we can have increased viral activity. So if there's a lower thyroid activity, then we do tend to have more viral activity. We tend to get more infections because the body is trying to throw up a heat to get rid of the toxicity. So going back to our two people, then we've got the hydration, the pH, the light availability, and the lower temperature. And if that was two plants, we've got one plant that's looking nice and healthy and robust, and the other one wouldn't be. So if we've got this lower temperature, then we've got more stagnation in the body. The bowel's not working as effectively as it would like to. The liver can't cleanse as well as it would like to. Not breaking down essential fatty acids as it would like to. And also we can get imbalanced bile. And in Tibetan medicine, bile is of the utmost importance. It's not just for breaking down fats. It supports the whole body. Going back to Lindler, what did he say about what was his understanding of what was health and disease? And he said there's three primary causes of disease: lowered vitality, which is what I've been talking about here with the cell, an abnormal composition of blood and lymph, and certainly we'd have that if the bile wasn't working properly, and an accumulation of waste material, morbid matter and poison. So, we haven't got the energy and the movement in the body to get rid of things. And he said that was the primary cause of disease. And going back to Dr. McDonough and his research that is gathering dust, he said diseases result when there was damage to the rhythmic changes in blood proteins. And he believed that all matter was derived from a life force. So this is a traditional doctor. All matter came from a life force or energy which pulsated in cycles. And a disturbance to that cycle resulted in disease. And he stated that there is only one disease. And that disease is fundamentally the same in plants, animals, and man. But there are several manifestations of that, whether we want to call it a migraine, whether we call it arthritis or lupus or a thyroid issue. They're all the same thing, which he said is a disturbance of protein in the blood of animals and man. And it was this part, disturbance to the cycle, resulted in disease, which then got me thinking about the work of Gaston Naessens. So he did a lot of research into pleomorphism, which is what Beauchamp was doing, pleomorphism. And what Gaston Naessens found, this is the pleomorphic cycle. Basically what that means is that bacteria can morph into something which is more pathogenic, become even more pathogenic, and then become yeast-like and viral-like. Now, Gaston Naessens found that there were 3 stages of health. 1, 2, 3. The somatids there, that's the microzymas of Beauchamp. So he said there were 3 stages, and there was an inhibitor in the blood that stopped it going any further. And that was health. So it went round in circles like that. But as soon as that inhibitor went, then we moved into bacterial forms, rod-like forms, which are more pathogenic, becoming much more pathogenic here, bursting out yeast forms, and then viral forms as well. And that will depend on the terrain. So if we've got the terrain right, we've got more alkalinity there, then we won't have that happening. And the terrain depends on the electrolyte balance and dealing with stress. So you've probably worked out that detoxification of the liver is really important. Otherwise we reabsorb those toxins, and what the liver does is it shuts down its sphincters, and then toxins then get pushed back into the bloodstream, and then they will move back into the lymph. And that's going to affect the immune system, and then we can get chest infections and things like that. So what should happen with the movement of toxins out of the cells, which is happening on a daily basis from the cell into the lymph, lymph goes to the blood then takes that down to the liver, which siphons it all off, puts the rubbish in the bile, and then out through the bowels. That's what should happen. Let's say the bowels aren't working properly, or maybe it gets to the liver and the liver just can't cope with that, those toxins, and so the liver then becomes compromised, which then will throw it back into the blood, which then throws it back into the lymph. That's when we get the chest infections, ear infections, tonsillitis, and then back into the cells. And then that cell becomes darker and less able to cleanse. This is the naturopathic hierarchy of organs. Everything starts in the gut, so the colon is at the bottom. And if that isn't working properly, then we can move up to skin. We can get issues with the skin. Now this might be 2 generations back. Maybe our grandfather had a problem with constipation or bowels not working properly. Maybe our father then had problems with his skin. And then maybe, we've got a few issues with liver. As a woman, maybe we've got heavy menstruation, so we're using the uterus as a route out. But once that stops at menopause, it all goes back to the liver, and if the liver's not coping, then we can get kidney infections, lung infections. I see this so many times. And the body will always keep it away from the heart and the mind. The body always works for us. It will always do the best it can under the circumstances given to us. Looking at it slightly differently, we've got the stress dehydration that I was talking about. We've got those electrolyte changes, the pH change, leading to a blood sugar issue. If we've got blood sugar issue, then the brain tells us to have more tea or coffee or manic working, that kind of thing. Affects the adrenals, which then ultimately will affect thyroid function, because the thyroid relies on the adrenals. And if we've got a blood sugar issue, that directly affects the thyroid. Maybe we've got dehydration, and then we've got the liver stagnation, which I was talking about, affecting the breakdown of fats. I won't go into methylation because it's more complicated, but that's going to affect the whole body and loads of different symptoms, which could then end up with liver, with the skin, with lack of energy, with what we call histamine problems, mast cell activation syndrome. All of these things that are banded around are sort of like top of the pyramid. But we need to sort all that out rather than starting at the top. So you can probably see that the resulting symptoms are many. Hydrochloric acid deficiency, if we're distressed, then we deplete the stomach acid. And that will lead to loads of different symptoms. Anything you wanted to ask me about would be low stomach acid could be causing that. Hypoglycemia, I put up 3 slides of the different symptoms there. Magnesium. Magnesium is needed for over 300 processes in the body. Liver detox symptoms are many. Bile affects the whole body. Methylation, homocysteine, histamine. There's loads and loads and loads of different symptoms. So I think hopefully you can see how from stress and from that electrolyte imbalance, how it can then escalate into all of these different symptoms. Thyroid issues, there's loads of different symptoms there. It's difficult to say what to do about it because everybody is different, and so it has to be unravelled on an individual level. But we do need to reduce stress. Because I work with nutrition, then I'm always working with diet. I make the diet as simple as possible, going back to the earth element of Chinese medicine. Soups, stews, casseroles, easy to digest. So that's one of the things that I'll put in if somebody is quite debilitated. Need to be off the diuretics, need to be drinking a little bit more water, but we don't want loads of water going in. It's like watering a dry plant. But we need to look at where the stress is, and then that needs to be addressed. We need exercise, so not too much exercise, it depends on the person as to how much they can deal with. We need to check to see structurally what's going on, to take the stress away from there. We need to live with the seasons and eat seasonally. Intermittent fasting is really good for something called autophagy, which is the breakdown of the mitochondria when they're not working properly. Because if we're holding on to them, then that can cause problems. So intermittent fasting and cold water as well. Now, some of you may have heard of Wim Hof. That has an effect on the mitochondria as well, beneficial effect. Being out in nature, lots of sleep, making sure we're eliminating properly, and also making sure we're breathing properly. which is just fundamental, and you might think, what's that mean? But it actually means we should be breathing with our mouth closed, and if we're sleeping with our mouth open, then that is going to affect the central nervous system, because if you think about an animal, I'm not talking about dogs, let's say a cat. If you saw a cat panting, you'd think, gosh, that cat is really quite stressed, because they always have their mouths shut, and we should have our mouths shut. So if we've got our mouth open, and when we're sleeping, then we're in a sympathetic state in the body, which means we're triggering adrenaline and stress. So it's really important, correct breathing, and then that's bringing the oxygen in. Okay, so thank you for your attention. If you've got any questions, then happy to answer them. I can't answer specifics because everybody's different, and I would need to do a history. Yes, Richard.
Well, thanks for a fantastic talk, and I'm so pleased that Rob's filmed it, because I'll watch that again and again. And could you please kind of write a book on all this? I've got loads of questions. I'll just confine it to two.
Okay.
First one's about about food supplements.
Yes.
There was a moment halfway through where you referred to magnesium, and I think I heard you say, you can't just sort of take magnesium to solve the problem, because you have to unravel what's behind it.
Yes.
So that leads me to the question, what your view is about taking food supplements. I mean, I've been taking regular food supplements, particularly since March 2020, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But I'm not doing it in a scientific way, and that leads into your question about like each person's different.
Yes.
So presumably, is it possible to generalise about supplements and have some kind of general view that certain things are going to be generally helpful?
Yeah.
Or would you recommend, being a practitioner, that you have to look at each person and make a decision about what range of supplements might be helpful?
Yeah.
So that's my first question.
Yeah, it would depend on the individual as to what they might need, but certainly vitamin C, vitamin D are just standard things. It's whether you can utilise it though. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Working with she's another student actually, but a new client, and her vitamin D levels were rock bottom, and she sent me blood tests that she's just done, and I emailed her back and I said, what's happening about your vitamin D levels? What did your doctor say about that? And she said, oh, he just said, well, it's winter time, so we expect it to be low. And I'm like, this is crazy. This is crazy. We really need to get your vitamin D levels up. Whether she can utilise it at this point is another matter, but at least we can put some in to just try and, like a buffer almost. But with her, I'm really working on a very foundational level. I've never seen anybody been on so many drugs in my life. It was astounding. And I had this lovely email from her today, and her eyesight's better, and she's only been doing it 3 weeks, and she'd been to the optician. The optician didn't know what was going on. He said that they'd never seen this before. And that's just working because there wasn't much room to work, because she was so debilitated, just working on diet and hydration, drinking linseed tea, which I get a lot of people to do, drinking more water, taking out the diuretics, and she's had some amazing changes. And then we can move into the supplements and start looking at supplements, because then she'll be stronger. So it very much depends on vitality. It's such a big subject, supplements, because they might not be right. And what I find with a lot of people is they're taking lots of different things and not realising that they're doubling up, and that can be a bit worrying as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of question that I have, because, as I say, I mean, I'm taking a range of supplements. I'm not doing it scientifically, so I've got no idea what the interaction effects might be, whether they might be cancelling each other out and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think really needs to see a practitioner for that, to get the clarity as to what's right and what's not right at that point in time. But I would always recommend vitamin D, vitamin C to help with the immune system.
Can I ask one more quick thing?
Yeah.
I don't want to be greedy. Just to say that there was this series that Jonathan Landsman, who's a guy from the States who does these wonderful docu-series, and I watched the whole series about 6 months ago, and there was this particular doctor on who was actually a naturopath and a nutritionist called they call him Dr. Bob, I can't remember his name. This is someone from the USA.
Right.
And he was saying, he said, the one thing that I would recommend for everyone to do in terms of kind of gut health, I think it was each day eat half a red apple, eat,
yes, I know the person. Yes.
Eat a raw carrot,
yes.
Eat a radish, and eat beetroot, and
yes.
do that every day. And
yes.
since I saw that, and this guy was so,
yeah.
I was so impressed with him. This is maybe a year ago. I've been doing it every day since, and it has transformed my kind of digestion and my regularity.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, as a nutritionist, what you might have to say about that.
No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think diet makes the biggest change, as I've just said with this person that I'm working with. We can take lots of supplements, but it's the diet that makes the biggest difference. It really is. And and I see that with myself, and I get caught up in supplements and think, oh, this looks good and that looks good. But actually, I can take those things and not do that much with my diet. I mean, my diet's pretty good anyway. But if I'm really strict with my diet and I'm like doing a kind of detox, that makes the biggest change, not the supplements. So yeah, I completely agree on that. Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
The relationship between salt intake and sodium intake and hypertension.
Yes.
Doctors say you must reduce your salt cardiac, but I'm not so sure how much do we need to reduce our salt if we have a salt craving?
Yeah, well, the problem is that our diets have flip-flopped the other way, because we wouldn't have had that much sodium in our diet. Historically, we would have had a lot of potassium and magnesium, and the body is geared up to hold on to sodium and calcium. And so, that with some people, depending on predispositions, then that can push the blood pressure up, which is then connected with higher levels of sodium. But you see, it's very much connected in with fluids. And blood pressure and blood sugar are intricately linked, and it's all a fluids problem at the end of the day, which is what I've described there, that flow backwards and forwards. But if we've got sodium moving inside the cell continually, we will get cravings for salt, because we need I'm not saying that salt is awful, but we shouldn't be having lots of it. We should have a balance. And I was taught that with the amount of sodium that's in our diet now, we would need fieldfuls of vegetables to counteract that imbalance there. Yeah. So it depends how you're eating. If you're eating a lot of, commercial foods, then there's going to have a lot of sodium in there. Yeah. It's getting the balance, really.
Hi Mary. Do you do when you work with your clients, do you get them to do more fasting or intermittent fasting? How do you, or is it just diet? What's your...
Yeah, it would completely depend on the person. Absolutely depend on the person. First of all, I work with getting blood sugar stable, because unless we've got the blood sugar stable, I don't know what is going on, because you saw all the symptoms that I put up there. I've got to get that stable. And blood sugar is a fluids problem, so then we're putting in the hydration. I use linseed tea a lot because it hydrates, it holds onto water. It's a mixture of oil and water. So it's bringing that wonderful message to the gut, you're okay. So I work at that level, and once I've got the blood sugar stable, and they may need, bearing in mind these people might be drinking tea and coffee as well, so that needs to go, and you need to get the blood sugar stable. And then once you've got the blood sugar stable, without the tea and the coffee, because they might need snacks coming in, as well, because when you take the tea and the coffee out, that person's expecting a kick up, or the body's expecting a kick up from a cup of coffee, but they're not having the cup of coffee, so the blood sugar's doing a nosedive. That's what we call withdrawal symptoms, so they need to have their snacks in there. That's like the first stage. And then once we've got that, then we take the snacks away, get them more stable that way, and then they can do the intermittent fasting, because then they've got the ability to be able to go longer times. Yeah, so it's a step-by-step process, depending on the vitality of the person. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about light? So you talk about the photon being taken into the body, into the cells. Are we talking about the visible spectrum? Are we talking about a wider range of electromagnetic field? Is it sunlight? Because I kind of...
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think I would keep it really simple and say we're talking about sunlight, but we're also talking photons of light within the photon belt that we're in. The galaxy is in the photon belt now. So I'd keep it at that level. I mean, I don't know enough about light to be able to answer it in any more depth than that. Other than we need that light, we need that oxygen for the cells to work properly.
Yeah, I like the connection with the source and the consciousness and the awakening it brings. And,
absolutely, it's absolutely. Yeah.
Because I've heard that, and I'm studying naturopathy. I've heard it in my course a lot, but I also come from a scientific background, and I kind of doesn't make sense. It makes sense on a more spiritual ground.
Yeah, it's our connection to source, that light, the light coming in. Yeah.
Just ask a question. I just wondered what your view on colloidal silver is.
I've not studied it, to be honest. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's fine, but
Because I use it quite regularly. Myself and my
I think if you use it and it's working for you, then fine. Yeah, I tend to use like garlic is a very powerful
We use
antimicrobial.
that as well, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
colloidal silver has cured so many things for us.
yeah.
I think it's important people look into it as a natural medicine.
Yes.
It's been wonderful for us.
Yeah. As it is for many people.
Yes.
Yeah.
How long have you been in this photon belt in our galaxy, please?
I think we started to go in 1987.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then we sort of like slowly moved in. We're all in now. The whole galaxy is in the photon belt now. Age of Aquarius. That's what it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that amazing journey, which has got an awful lot to think about, I must say.